Hello and welcome back. Today we will look at lecture 4. In lecture 3 we looked at the various theories that primarily talked about linguistic constraints. There are some innate constraints that help the children acquiring words in the stage when they are in the naming explosion stage, and those are the theories that talked about how probably they are able to narrow down the choices with respect to mapping the word on the name, the label and the word label and the referent mapping, and how do they extend and how it goes. So, various linguistic theories, and we also we finished that module. We concluded that module by saying that there is, of course, there are supporting as well as countering evidence for each of those theories. However, of late there is a new kind of a focus on that is away from the linguistic constraint and which looks at the other cognitive processes. So, treating language acquisition within the larger cognitive domain, general cognitive mechanisms, that is where we are focusing on. So, is it possible that larger cognitive mechanisms, general cognitive mechanisms help children learn language apart from the linguistic constraints. So, that is what we will look at in this segment. Primarily looking at two kinds of factors. One is called the socio-pragmatic factor and the other is attentional learning account. So, the question that was asked was, is it only linguistic constraints that help in learning words? Is it possible that there are other factors that might be as important? Of course, this theory does not negate that there could be a possible linguistic innate linguistic constraint, but what if there are other factors as well? So, a number of researchers pointed out that children's learning of words is a result of their growing need to understand communicative intent and joint attention. We talked about joint attention in the initial stages. So, while the child is growing, they are also an active member of the social scenario. They are part of a group of people. So, they have to automatically they will grow up learning about the beliefs and intentions of the other members in the conversation. So, what if that also shapes the way language learning happens? That is the idea. So, there are these are the two powerful theories that have been proposed, socio-pragmatic factor and attentional learning, as we have just seen. Socio-pragmatic account was given by many people, but primarily Brunner, Tomasello and some others. So, the idea of this behind this theory is that children do not need linguistic constraints. Rather they are guided by what others are trying to say. It is not linguistic constraint, but what is the communicative intent of the people who are talking to them or who are around them. That is the idea. So, in other words, they call it social clues. So, social clues or cues you can call them as well. So, these are the cues that help them learn the meaning of new words rather than innate kind of a linguistic constraint. So, what is a social cue? Social cue basically is something that is the part of any kind of a conversation setup. So, when we speak, we not only use words, but there are also a lot of non-linguistic factors that are part of any kind of a conversation, any kind of a scenario, speech scenario, so to say. So, according to this theory, those extra linguistic or non-linguistic cues are adequate, rich and diverse. They are good enough to help the child pick up the meaning of a word. That is the idea. So, such cues will be utilized to can be and automatically will be utilized by the children to work out the meaning of a word. So, what are those cues? For example, looking at the object, gesturing to it, or even facial expressions. So, when we are talking about any object, typically we will look at that object, sometimes we might even point to the object and so on and so forth, facial expressions will change. So, these are things that accompany any kind of a speech scenario. They might be different from culture to culture, but they do exist in every culture. So, that is what Brunner and Tomasello have talked about in terms of social cues, and this is what they pick up. So, in order to make use of these social cues, children have to indulge in two cognitive tasks. One is establish joint attention and understand the speaker's communicative intent. When we talked about joint attention, remember we talked about two kinds of joint attention. One was initiating, the other was responding. So, both of these are crucial in case of using social cues in order to understand word meaning. So, even though I have written here establishing joint attention, it is understood that we are also talking about responding to joint attention. So, both IJA as well as RJA will be utilized. The second is to understand the speaker's communicative intent, what is the person trying to say. By that we have seen that children from very early are capable of understanding what the other person is probably thinking, or how to attract the attention of the other person and so on. Building blocks of theory of mind, if you remember. So, those things are already there in place, and that is why they say that because child is already growing up with all the cognitive required cognitive mechanisms in place, they should be good enough. You do not need linguistic constraints to help them out. Now, let us see some examples. So, a child playing with her pet dog, when the mother says that is a dog. The child will not need any other kind of a constraint, but they will actually use joint attention by turning her gaze to the referent, because the mother, when they say it is a dog, mother probably is looking at the dog. So, the child will also look at the dog, follow the mother's gaze and look at the dog, and this is how they will be responding to joint attention and thereby mapping the word on the referent immediately. They do not need any other kind of cue. So, simultaneously she will also read the mother's intention to name the entity. So, while the mother says that is a dog, she means that this is the name of that entity. She does not mean that to take the dog outside for a walk, for example. So, these are the two things that the child immediately picks up in such a scenario. So, one famous example, famous experiment that has looked at this particular idea is called the Toma experiment. This was done reported by Baldwin 1991, 1993. So, this experiment shows that children do use social cues to learn novel words. So, they were given a toy in the experiment scenario went like this. The children were given a toy and the experimenter also had another toy in her hands. Now, they created two kinds of condition. In one condition, this is which is called the joint attention condition, half the children were made to take part in that condition, other half of the children were taking part in the normal other kind of discrepant condition. So, in the joint attention condition, what happened was the experimenter waited till the child and she were looking at the child's toy, and then she labeled the child's toy as it is a Toma. So, both the child and the experimenter have a toy each in their hands, but in the joint attention scenario, they both looked at the child's toy and called it this is a Toma, it is a Toma. So, basically the child's toy is called the Toma. In the other condition, the same thing, everything remaining same, but the child is looking at her own toy, experimenter is looking at her own toy, and then the experimenter calls her own toy as it is a Toma. So, in both the situations there are two different entities that are getting called as the Toma. This is the first phase. In the second phase, children were shown both the toys and asked where is Toma. Children 18 and 19 months old, but not before that, from both conditions identified the Toma correctly. So, whether they were attending to it or they were not attending to it, they in both conditions children could identify the Toma correctly. So, what does this mean? This means that children could identify by simply paying at, even if they are not overtly attending to it, but they could still name the object correctly, which means that even if they are not even if they are not attending to it personally, they were aware of what is happening. So, this is how this is one proof that was given for this theory. Another domain that this theory explains very well is the domain of verb learning. We have seen that most of the cases we are talking about noun, like this is a dog, table, this and that, all these examples we have already given. But in case of verb learning, it is a little tricky. Also many languages has shown that children learn the nouns first. Many languages, English, American English we have already seen, and other languages also. So, this is what makes learning verbs and a little tricky is that what makes learning verbs a little tricky is that it is very short lived. Verbs refer to action. Now, those actions are short lived, it is not sitting there. So, for example, you show this is a toy, the toy is there, it is going to be there until and unless you remove it. But did you play? The playing thing has happened, it is gone, done and dusted, right. So, this is a short lived and very intangible sort of a thing. So, that is why researchers say that verb learning is a little tricky affair, and also to find out how they learn the verbs is also again a tricky affair. So, most of the time when children hear a verb, the action is not exactly being performed. So, for example, you are eating, I am running, etc. Typical sentences that the mothers will use with children will be something like this: have you eaten your dinner? In which case this is talking about a completed action. Let us play with the toys. So, this is a plan and anticipation of playing that will happen, that is not happening right now. Also, we are going to the grandma's house. So, that is an anticipating an action, and so on. This is how typical sentences will be. Thus, the mothers use verbs to either request the child to complete an action, anticipate an impending action, and so on and so forth, rather than doing an action and saying this is what it is. So, for example, this is playing, this is running, as opposed to this is a toy, this is a book, kind of a thing. So, that is what we meant when we say that it is intangible, and typically it is not talked about when it is happening then and there. But children do learn verbs, we all know that. So, how do they learn? Now, this theory says that we have an answer. What is the answer? The answer lies in the intention reading. What is the person trying to say? The other person, whenever whatever action they are referring to, that intention the child can read. So, they can actively monitor what the intention of the other person is. Now, there is this famous experiment called widget experiment, that is what showed how it is done. This was done by Thomas Eleven Akhtar in 1995. So, the scenario was like this: the experimenters created a novel apparatus, a novel thing that the child has not seen before, where a toy spun around on a turntable. That is the toy, it is a toy, and children saw the event and heard the experimenter say a sentence that would either refer to the toy as widget or the action which it. Very slight differentiation, and depending on the kind of action. So, what kind of different kinds of action? The experimenter created two different kinds of social cues. In the first case, action highlighted condition. Action highlighted condition had the experimenter was preparing the toy, the turntable. So, she was readying the experiment for action, then she placed the toy on that, and then alternated her gaze between the toy and the child. So, she was making the toy ready for playing, then looked at the toy and looked at the child, and then said the sentence widget or widget. In the object highlighted condition, this was a different kind of a condition where the experimenter picked up the toy and alternated gaze between the toy and the child and simply said widget or widget. So, there are two different cues and two different kinds of output that the child saw and heard. This was the test, this was the planning stage, the first stage. In the test phase, they were asked a question: can you show me widget or which it? The result showed a mapping between the condition and the response. What do we mean by that? Children in the action highlighted condition were more likely to demonstrate the action. So, what do we can you show me widget meaning, almost meaning, can you show me how to widget it? So, they will actually play out the action because they have seen the action happening. In the other case, when they were in the object highlighted condition, they did not do the, they did not favor the action. So, which was concluded as the socio-pragmatic cues provided by the experimenter were responsible for the adults for the result, because the child was able to read the intention of the other person. Now, third advantage of the socio-pragmatic theory explains the cross linguistic difference in word categories. We have already seen the Korean versus English difference in prepositions. So, in English, in and on does not have an equivalence in Korean, rather they have a tight fit versus loose fit kind of a distinction. So, if the child pays attention to the language around her, it does not need any universal biases, because you are, it is a socio-pragmatic theory. So, you are looking at other people what they are doing and you simply understand what to do. So, you do not need any universal theories for that. So, there are evidence from different cultures. One interesting study that was reported on particular people, Kaluli people from Papua New Guinea. Now, these people in the world has different kinds of cultures. Not every culture has the same kind of activity around a child. In the Western scenario, the adults typically tend to include the child in the conversation, even if they are not able to converse per se, they are included, because they are also persons, they also are part of the entire scenario. So, that is how it works, but in many other cultures that is not how they think. They, for example, this particular people think that children have no understanding of the world around them. So, there is no point including them in the conversation at all. So, they, as a result, they do not engage children in any conversation. So, however, does it mean that they do not learn language? They also learn language perfectly fine, because they are able to tune in to the conversation, adult conversation that is happening around them. Even if there is no focused and child directed speech in that environment, they still pick up the language, because they are attending to the social cues around them, they are attending to the other people talking. So, other people talking about people, about events, about objects or whatever, by tuning into that conversation, these children are able to learn their words and their mappings. So, that is one of the one kind of proof in a cross linguistic setup. Criticisms have also been there for socio-pragmatic theory. For example, there are two primary arguments that they have given. Argument number 1 is social learning cannot be the whole story. If you depend on only social learning, probably you do not get the entire picture, because word learning can take place without social scaffolding. That is the point number 1 against this socio-pragmatic theory. Point number 2 is we do not need socio-pragmatic skills to explain word learning altogether. So, previous theories they have said that we do not need linguistic theories. Now, this criticism of this theory says we do not need socio-pragmatic theory. So, let us unpack the argument number 1. Argument number 1 basically says that children are capable of learning words before their ability to read the intention of the other person is in place. Now, this ability to read the intention develops over a period of time. It is not very early in life. But we have already talked about the MacArthur communicative developmental inventory. So, that is what was used as an example of word learning preceding the ability to read others' intention. So, this inventory assesses the language abilities of infants and children through developmental stages. So, in this study, in the particular study by Bates et al. 1994, they revealed that 8-month-olds understand 30 words, some even 90 words. We are talking about comprehension. So, even at that layer, at that age, at that layer of developmental stages, they are able to comprehend so many words, and that is not the stage where the theory of mind or joint attention or understanding others' intentions have been completely developed. So, which means this is not necessary for understanding words or following the words. And then similarly, similar findings have been reported from other kinds of language. For example, there is something called baby sign. Baby sign is kind of a fun part of sign language, which is used typically with babies, with small children. So, babies who were taught baby sign language could produce signs for food, drink, activities at 6 months. Again, the stage where their ability to read the attention of others are not entirely in place. So, they have not yet fully developed it, because this develops between 9 and 12 months. So, they must be having other means to learn words. Similarly, data from autistic children have also been used as a counter to the argument that autistic children, we all know that they find it very difficult to assess social cues. In fact, autistic children, one of the most important signs of children belonging to autism spectrum disorder is that they neither initiate joint attention nor they respond to joint attention. Now, here they should, that means they should not be able to learn any language at all. Of course, there is language delay among autistic children, which is there, but some children do learn to speak, actually some children are also good at language. How is it that even possible? There should be no autistic children should be able to speak if this was dependent entirely on the sociopragmatic cues. So, in the lab based study, one very important study, that they showed that children with autism consistently picked up an interesting object as the referent of a novel word, in spite of the experimenter clearly signaling something different, which is a boring object, as the intended referent. So, this is just one example, but we have more of such examples where children belonging to the spectrum refuse to attend to the same thing that the other person is attending to, even after clearly signaling that this is what the referent is. However, in real world, children with autism are also found to learn words, sometimes even at par with TD children. TD refers to typically developing children. So, sometimes some children in the spectrum actually do master language alongside many other children. So, sometimes now when we talk about autism spectrum disorder, it is a spectrum. So, there are different stages of the disorder. Some people might have very severe case, some are more mild, and so on. So, the mild patients typically do not have very much difficulty with language, but even when there are severe sociopragmatic problems, difficulties, even among them language development has been observed. So, this sociopragmatic theory does not answer that. So, as a result of which this theory needs a relook. That was argument 1. Argument 2 is we do not need sociopragmatic skills to explain word learning at all. For example, Samuelson and Smith cited an influential study by Akhtar and group that was used as a proof for sociopragmatic bias. So, one particular very interesting study, we will look at it shortly. So, that study was used as a proof for sociopragmatic learning, sociopragmatic scaffolding. But as per Samuelson and Smith, they said that the same information, same study can be interpreted very differently. It need not be interpreted in terms of sociopragmatic cues, but it can be interpreted in terms of general purpose cognitive mechanism. So, let us just see what the experiment was. So, this was the actual experiment by Akhtar, Carpenter and Tomasello, 1996. What happened was, in this case, there was again it had 2 phases, training phase and testing phase. In the training phase, there were 4 people, 2 experimenters, the child and the child's parent, only one parent was there, played with 3 novel objects, 3 objects that the child did not know before, they all are novel for the child. Then after playing for some time, they were sitting on the floor and playing with 3 objects. After some time, experimenter 1 leaves the room along with the parent. So, 2 people leave the room. Now, the child and the experimenter B are left inside the room. They are playing. They are still playing. While those two people are outside, experimenter B introduces a new object to the child and places all the 4 objects in a transparent box, so that it can be, you can see the contents of the box from outside. After some time, the experimenter A and the parent return. Upon returning, the experimenter A exclaims, "Look, I see a gazer, a gazer." This is what the experimenter says. Before this, none of the objects had a name, none of the objects were called anything. The child had no name, no label for any of the objects. Now, what happened was, in the test phase, children were asked, "Give me the gazer." All children preferred the 4th object as the referent of the word. Now, the authors claimed, Tomasello's group claimed that because the child got it, child knew that it was the experimenter B was talking about the 4th object, because they the children were interpreting the experimenter's intention, because the experimenter was outside in the room when the novel object was introduced. So, naturally this is the thing that they were finding novel, as a result of which they would have exclaimed that this is the "I see a gazer." Remember our Anne and Sally experiment, this is somewhat similar, and this was taken as a proof of interpreting the experimenter's intention, and as a result sociopragmatic theory. However, Samuelson and Smith said that this could be interpreted very differently. The result is just a matter of interpretation, we can interpret the whole thing very differently. So, they argued that the children were influenced by the novelty of events surrounding the introduction of the 4th object rather than the other experimenter's intention. So, the first 3 objects were introduced in the same context when all of them were sitting on the floor and playing together. The 4th object was introduced in a different setting with one adult sitting at the table. So, as a result of which it is the context that combined with the preference for labeling the novel object with the novel word. So, they concluded that the children attached new label to the new object because of the changed context, because the context in which that object was introduced. So, it has nothing to do with the children's sophisticated ability to read the intention of the experimenter. So, to prove their point, they did the experiment again, but with some minor changes to check if their hypothesis holds. So, in the new version of the experiment, what they did was experimenter A did not leave the room. So, thereby you cancel out the experimenter A's intentions or beliefs or novelty of the situation for the experimenter A. The experimenter A sits there in the same room. However, the 4th object was introduced in the presence of A, but in a new setting. So, here also the setting within which the 4th object was introduced is new, it is not the same setup. So, what did they do? The new setting was added like in the sense of sitting at a table that had a bright colored cloth. The first scenario, first they were sitting on the floor and playing, and then the 4th object was introduced by sitting on the table which had a bright colored cloth. Children still prefer the 4th object for as the gazer, and thereby they proved that it is because of the context rather than the experimenter, because in this experiment, experimenter did not leave the room. So, they said that this is a case of a cognitive bias. However, the story does not end here. There have been many other studies, many other counter examples and also some other studies favoring them and so on. There is a lot of other works that have followed, but you get the baseline of the understanding as to what are the main theories and how they were countered. Now, let us move on to attentional learning account by Samuelson and Smith, because based on their findings, based on their the way they countered the previous finding, they came up with the attentional learning account. This account puts the child's cognitive abilities at the center of the learning process. So, nothing, not the socio-cognitive, social cues, but the ability of the child himself or herself, the abilities, cognitive abilities. So, one such ability is the associative learning ability of children. What does that mean? Associative learning ability means if two things co-occur enough number of times, then you understand, code them similarly. So, this is the this kind of creates a prediction for that name to occur with this object. So, for example, if the word book occurs in the presence of the same kind of particular kind of a shape of an object, then the child will eventually learn that this is what it means. So, every time you see a book, you call it a book. So, over a period of time, because of this constant co-occurrence, they will learn that this is how it is. This is how the mapping is done. So, eventually they learn to associate the shape with the word. Now, what does this depend on? This ability is not dependent on any kind of specific word learning mechanism, but it is based on general purpose processes of perceiving, remembering and attending. This is how they put it. So, within this theory there are three general processes that are considered important along with the associative learning. So, attention mechanism, memory and cross situational learning. Cross situational learning is very interesting, we have seen this before as well. So, when you can map across context, then you are able to understand what the how the words map onto different kinds of context. So, for example, let us go back to the child's little girl again with her pet dog, with her mother says that this is a dog. Now, the attentional learning theory would predict that the girl will associate the word with the object, because the object is the current focus of the conversation, that is the focus of attention. So, we are attending to something, whatever we are attending to is the focus of attention, because the child is aware of that, thereby she learns. Eventually, she learns to extend the term to other members of the same species through a kind of a shape bias. And however, as per this theory, this bias is not innate, rather learned through the child's exposure through different kinds of scenarios. One very interesting study that provide proof for this theory is by Smith and Yu. Here they looked at children who were 12 or and 14 months of age, and they showed that even children this small can use cross situational learning. This is central to the attentional learning theory, right. So, the experiment went like this. In the training phase, children saw picture pairs of objects and heard a name. So, two objects appeared at the same time, a pair of objects came at the same time, but they heard only one name. For example, they had a star and a square shaped object, and they heard the word Bosa. Then again these pictures went, and then another pair appeared, in which case there was a star shaped object alongside a round shaped object. They again heard the word Bosa. This is some sort of a logical reasoning kind of a test. So, star and star comes along with a square, then star comes with a round, you are hearing the same word. So, you all automatically know what is Bosa referring to. In the third stage, this is again training stage continuing, they see a square and a round object, and now they hear a novel word called Gasser. They hear this new word. Now, none of the training trials provided adequate information about exact name of each of the objects. However, because if the child remembers across context, they will be able to easily figure out what does the word Bosa or the word Gasser refer to, right. So, this is the idea. So, in the test phase, they were presented with a novel word and two objects, one target, another a distractor. Children looked for significantly longer time to the target object, showing recognition. So, basically they found proof of children being able to map things across context and thereby proving the theory. Next theory is about which is called syntactic bootstrapping theory. This theory says that previous all theories are good, they are not denying any of the theories, they say they all are good. However, in case of verbs we need a separate theory. All other theories may be good for nouns, but for verbs we need a syntactic theory. Because for verbs children need to pay attention to the syntax, the entire sentence structure, in order for them to get the real meaning of verbs. So, we have already seen why learning verbs is a problem. So, this is what they were trying to address. Now, this is a study carried out in 1999 and many others followed, but this is one of the most important. The study went like this. Adults were shown a number of videos of mother and child playing, and the audio was turned off. So, they could not hear what the mother is saying to the child, but they looked at the video. The task was to identify the word the mother was saying at a particular point, indicated with a beep. So, because it was all audio was not there. So, there were beeps in certain cases, and wherever there was a beep, the person was supposed to say what is the mother saying to the child. Now, each word occurred 6 times in different situations, thus giving adequate clue about them. However, the results showed that only 45% nouns and 15% verbs were identified by the participants. Now, here this study was carried out on adults. So, in spite of giving adequate amount of cues, the participants could not understand the verbs correctly most of the time. So, 85% of the time they failed. So, they concluded that simply observing words paired with events across multiple situations is not really good enough. So, since we do learn verbs too, this means there is a way out. That the way is syntactic bootstrapping. So, what does syntactic bootstrapping basically do? It does this different kinds of situations. For example, verbs referring to events having only one participant tend to occur in sentences with only one noun phrase. So, the examples like I sleep, I walk, etc. In such a situation, in this kind of a sentence, the verbs will have, if it has only one noun phrase, typically it will be an intransitive verb, right. So, sleeping, walking, falling, these are all intransitive, because you are I fail, I walk, I am doing the one, there is no other object, there is no direct object involved. Similarly, verbs that need 2 participants, where one participant causes something to happen to another participant, that is when we have something like a transitive verb. So, sentences would be like I read the book. So, I am the subject, book is the object, and then read is the transitive verb here. The third possibility is where the verbs will denote a transfer of an object from one donor to a recipient. So, I gave the book to Mohan. So, there are two objects here, the book and the person I gave it to. So, this is called a ditransitive verb. So, until and unless you have been cued into the sentence structure, you will not know the differences among these verbs. So, for example, on seeing a dog chase a cat, the mother says the dog is glorping the cat. So, in this kind of a scenario, the child will understand the meaning of glorping as that it refers to the activity that the dog is involved in right at that moment, not the cat. So, meaning it means chasing and not fleeing. So, as a result of which the meaning of the entire word is arrived at by looking at the full sentence. The dog is glorping the cat. So, in order to understand that, you need to just to understand the meaning of glorping, you need to understand the sentence, and the sentence in turn helps the child to learn the meaning of the word. So, this is called syntactic bootstrapping. However, this also has faced a lot of criticism. One line of criticism is that even at 3-year-old children cannot understand meaning of verbs by just hearing them in a sentence, because sentence learning, sentence acquisition happens a little later, and so even at 3 years they are not expected to learn them through sentences. So, as a result of which we come at the end of lecture 4, but we are still not sure as to what is happening. So, we have seen various kinds of theories, and each theory seems to have some sort of support from data, as well as there are some problems with that kind of a idea, with that kind of a hypothesis. So, there are criticisms for each. So, to solve the problem, we will try and look at yet another theory in the next segment. So, this is where we complete our lecture 4. Thank you.